My name is Ebony, and I am 34 years old. I was lying on a gurney in the emergency room watching my blood pressure drop on the monitor, while my parents posted selfies from a VIP box at an Elton John concert. They had refused to watch my 4-year-old twins while I went into emergency surgery, calling me a nuisance and a burden because I was interrupting their big night out. I looked at the nurse and made 2 phone calls. One was to a high-end nanny agency to save my children. The second was to my private banker to cut off every single credit card my family was using to buy their champagne. By the time they tried to pay for their 5-star dinner, their world had already crumbled. Before I tell you how I went from being their cash cow to their worst nightmare, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Please hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members to save yourself. I collapsed on the living room floor of my townhouse in Atlanta, just as I was serving dinner to my twins, Leo and Maya. The pain in my lower right abdomen was not a dull ache. It was a sharp, blinding explosion that dropped me to my knees. The plate of pasta I was holding shattered against the hardwood, sending sauce everywhere. My vision blurred and the room spun violently. Through the ringing in my ears, I could hear Leo screaming Mommy and Maya crying in terror. I knew immediately this was serious. I managed to crawl to my phone and dial 911. My breath came in short, ragged gasps as I told the operator my address. But my next thought was not about my life. It was about my children. I could not take them in the ambulance. I needed help. With trembling fingers, I dialed my mother, Beatrice. It was Friday night. I knew she and my father, Desmond, were at home getting ready for their evening. She answered on the second ring, but before I could speak, I heard the noise of a hairdryer in the background. Mom, I gasped, squeezing my eyes shut against the agony. I need you. I am on the floor. I think my appendix burst. The ambulance is coming. You need to come get the twins. The hairdryer stopped. There was a pause and then a heavy sigh of annoyance that I had heard 1,000 times since childhood. Ebony, are you serious right now? We are leaving in 20 minutes. Your father spent $500 a ticket for these Elton John seats. We have been planning this for months. Mom, please. I begged, tears streaming down my face as another wave of pain hit me. I am scared. The kids are crying. I need you to just drive over and stay with them until I get out of surgery. Her voice turned ice cold. Stop being such a drama queen. You always do this. You always have some crisis right when we are about to enjoy ourselves. Call a neighbor. We are not missing this concert to babysit. You are a grown woman, Ebony. Stop being a burden. Then she hung up. The ambulance hit a pothole, sending a fresh jolt of agony through my abdomen that made me cry out. The paramedic adjusted the IV flow, her eyes filled with sympathy, but I could not focus on her. My mind was racing back to the townhouse, where my 4-year-olds were alone with an elderly neighbor who could barely walk without her cane. I had one card left to play, my sister, Chantel. Surely, even if my mother was cold, my sister would remember the times I paid her rent or bought her groceries when she was between jobs. I dialed her number with shaking fingers, praying she would pick up. She answered on the third ring, her voice loud and distorted by background music. Hey, big sis, she practically shouted. You will not believe this limo. It has a ceiling that looks like the night sky. Brad really outdid himself this time. Chantel. Please listen, I gasped, trying to keep my voice steady despite the pain. I am in the back of an ambulance. My appendix has ruptured. Mom refused to help. I need you to turn around. Leo and Maya are alone with Mrs. Gable. There was a pause, and for a second I thought she was processing the gravity of the situation. Then I heard her cover the mouthpiece, but not well enough. She is asking us to go back, she whined to someone nearby. She says she is in an ambulance. Then came the voice of my brother-in-law, Brad. His tone was smooth, arrogant, and dripping with annoyance. Tell her we are already on the highway. We cannot just turn a stretch limo around in Friday traffic. It is probably just cramps anyway. She is always looking for attention. Chantel came back on the line, her voice taking on that same dismissive edge. Look, Ebony, Brad says we are too far out. We cannot turn this thing around. It is a huge inconvenience. Just call an Uber or something. We are celebrating tonight, do not be such a downer. But Chantel, the kids. I pleaded, my voice cracking. Click. The line went dead. She had hung up on me while I was being rushed to emergency surgery, choosing the ambiance of a rented limousine over the safety of her niece and nephew. I dropped the phone onto the stretcher, the silence in the ambulance deafening despite the siren wailing outside. I looked up to see the paramedic staring at me. She did not say a word, but her expression shattered me. It was a look of profound pity, the kind you give a stray dog that has been kicked one too many times. She had heard everything. She knew that the people who were supposed to love me had just left me for dead for the sake of a concert. I wiped the tears from my cheeks with the back of my hand. There was no time for self-pity. I had to be the mother my own mother refused to be. I picked up the phone again and dialed Nanny on Call. It was a premium service for corporate executives, the kind that cost a fortune but guaranteed immediate placement. When the operator answered, I did not hesitate. I need an emergency overnight nanny at my residence immediately, I said, my voice hardening. I do not care about the cost. The rate is $100 an hour for emergency dispatch plus a booking fee, the operator informed me. Fine, I said. I gave them my credit card number, the one my family did not have access to. Then came the hardest part. I had to give a complete stranger the code to my front door. I had to trust a person I had never met to enter my home and care for my terrified children because my own flesh and blood could not be bothered. As I recited the code, I felt a final severing in my chest. The bond with my family did not break. It was incinerated. The pre-op holding area was freezing, a stark contrast to the fever burning through my body. I lay on the narrow gurney, shivering under a threadbare blanket that smelled of antiseptic and distress. The morphine drip had taken the sharpest edge off the pain, leaving behind a dull, throbbing ache that pulsed in time with the heart monitor. Beep, beep, beep. It was the only sound in my world, a lonely metronome counting down the minutes until they cut me open. I clutched my phone to my chest like a lifeline. Part of me, the foolish inner child part that still craved my mother's approval, hoped it would ring. I imagined my father realizing the gravity of the situation, pulling the car over and rushing to the hospital. I imagined Chantel feeling a pang of guilt and texting me that she was on her way. When the phone finally vibrated against my sternum, my heart leaped. I lifted the screen with trembling fingers, desperate for a word of comfort. It was not a text message. It was a notification from my banking app. Transaction authorized, the Velvet Room. $842. I stared at the glowing numbers, my mind struggling to process the information through the haze of pain medication. The Velvet Room was the most exclusive steakhouse in the city, the kind of place where they shaved truffles onto your plate and charged $50 for water. My parents were not just at a concert, they were feasting. A second vibration buzzed against my hand. Transaction authorized, Sommelier Select. $415. They were drinking vintage wine. While I lay here alone waiting for emergency surgery that could determine if I lived or died, my family was spending over $1,200 of my money to celebrate their night out. They were toasting to their good fortune, eating aged steaks and laughing, all funded by the daughter they had just called a burden. The realization hit me harder than the ruptured appendix. I was not a daughter to them. I was not a sister. I was a wallet. I was an ATM machine that they occasionally had to tolerate to keep the cash flowing. They did not care if I was in pain. They did not care if I was scared. They only cared that the credit card worked. Miss Williams. A nurse appeared at my side holding a clipboard. Her face was kind, but her eyes were urgent. The surgeon is ready. We need your consent. She held out a pen. I looked at the form. The line for emergency contact was blank. The line for next of kin was blank. There was no one to hold my hand, no one to tell me it would be okay. I was completely, utterly alone. Tears, hot and angry, spilled from the corners of my eyes and ran into my ears. I took the pen, my grip white-knuckled. As I scribbled my signature on the paper, I was signing more than just a medical release. I was signing the end of an era. I was signing the termination of my role as the family bank. They were enjoying their last supper on my dime. I hoped that wine tasted like freedom because it was the last drop they would ever get from me. I woke up to the rhythmic mechanical beeping of a heart monitor. My eyelids felt heavy, like they were weighted down with lead, and my mouth tasted of copper and antiseptic. For a moment, I forgot where I was. I expected to hear the hum of my refrigerator or the sound of the twins playing in the next room. But as my vision cleared, the stark white ceiling tiles and the sterile smell of the recovery room brought the reality crashing back. I was in the hospital. I had just survived emergency surgery. I turned my head slowly, fighting the stiffness in my neck. The plastic chair in the corner was empty. The bedside table was bare, save for a plastic pitcher of water and my phone. No flowers, no balloons, no anxious parents holding my hand, no sister waiting to tell me I made it. The room was silent, save for the machines keeping track of a life my family seemed indifferent to. I reached for my phone with a hand that still trembled from the anesthesia. The screen lit up harsh and bright in the dim room. There were no missed calls, no text messages asking if the surgery was successful. My thumb hovered over the Instagram icon. I knew I should not look. I knew it would only pour salt into the fresh wound in my abdomen. But I had to know. I opened the app. The first image on my feed was a high-definition photo posted by my mother. It was taken in the VIP lounge of the concert venue. My mother and father were grinning, their faces flushed with excitement and expensive wine. Chantel was posing with her hand on her hip, showing off the new dress she had bought with my credit card. Brad had his arm around her, looking smug. They were wearing VIP lanyards that cost more than my mortgage payment. The caption read, "A magical night with the most important people in my world. So blessed to make these memories. #family first. The most important people." I was not one of them. I was the nuisance, the burden, the interruption they had successfully ignored. They were not just having fun without me. They were erasing me. They were publicly celebrating their joy while I lay alone in a hospital bed, stitched up and bleeding. My phone buzzed in my hand, startling me. It was a video call request. For a split second, I thought it might be them calling to gloat or perhaps offer a performative apology. But the name on the screen read, Mrs. Hattie. I accepted the call. The screen filled with the warm golden light of my own living room. Mrs. Hattie's face appeared soft and kind, framed by silver braids. "Hey there, brave mama," she cooed, her voice like a warm blanket. "Look who is waiting to say goodnight." She turned the camera. Leo and Maya were sitting at the kitchen table, their faces clean, wearing their favorite dinosaur pajamas. They were eating grilled cheese sandwiches cut into perfect triangles with apple slices on the side. They looked safe. They looked happy. "Hi, Mommy," Leo chirped, waving a piece of crust. Mrs. Hattie made the cheese melty. "We miss you," Maya added. But Mrs. Hattie read us the book about the moon. Tears welled in my eyes, hot and fast. A woman I had hired 3 hours ago, a complete stranger who knew nothing about me other than my credit card number and my address, had fed my children, bathed them, and read them stories. She had created a sanctuary of peace for them while their own grandmother was posting selfies. This stranger was doing the job my mother refused to do. She was mothering my children because my own mother had abdicated the role. Mrs. Hattie turned the camera back to herself. "You get some rest now, sugar. Do not you worry about a thing. These babies are safe with me. I will be right here when you wake up." I ended the call and let the phone drop onto the sheets. The silence returned, but it felt different now. It was not empty anymore. It was filled with a cold, hard resolve. I looked at the empty chair where my parents should have been. I looked at the Instagram photo of the people enjoying the concert tickets I had paid for. And then I looked at the black screen of my phone, where Mrs. Hattie's kind face had just been. They called me a burden. Fine. I would show them what happens when you drop a burden. You lose the person carrying you. The surgeon returned to my bedside, his face stripped of professional detachment. He looked at the monitors and then directly at me with a gravity that made the room feel suddenly colder. "You need to understand how close this was, Ms. Williams," he said, his voice low and serious. "Another 20 minutes and the sepsis would have been irreversible. If you had waited for a ride instead of calling that ambulance, we would be having a very different conversation right now. Or rather, I would be speaking to the coroner." His words hung in the sterile air. 20 minutes. My parents had wasted 10 minutes arguing with me on the phone about ticket prices. My sister had wasted 5 minutes complaining about turning the limo around. They had gambled with my life, and the house always wins. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. They did not just abandon me, they nearly killed me. They chose the opening act of a concert over my survival. The sorrow that had been weighing down my chest evaporated instantly, vaporized by a white-hot flash of pure rage. It was a clarifying anger, the kind that sharpens your vision and steadies your hands. I was done being the dutiful daughter. I was done being the safety net. It was time to cut the ropes. I picked up my phone. My fingers no longer trembled. I pulled up the contact for Charles, my dedicated relationship manager at Sovereign Private Bank. The platinum service line meant he answered on the second ring, regardless of the hour. "Mrs. Williams." Charles sounded concerned. "It is late. Is everything all right?" "No, Charles," I said, my voice raspy but steady as steel. "I suspect fraudulent activity on my accounts. I need to secure my assets immediately. I need you to freeze all secondary cards issued under my account effective this second. The black card ending in 4-5 issued to Beatrice Williams. The platinum card ending in 8-9 issued to Chantel Williams. I want them dead. No transactions in or out." I heard the rapid clicking of a keyboard on the other end. "Done," Charles confirmed. "They will be declined at the point of sale immediately. I am not finished." I continued staring at the ceiling tiles. "You handle the automatic drafts for the property on Oak Street. The utilities, the water, the landscaping, and the mortgage payments?" "Yes, Mom. We handle those monthly. Cancel them, all of them. Revoke the authorization." Charles paused for a beat, his professional demeanor cracking just slightly. "Mrs. Williams, that is your parents' residence. If we cancel the mortgage payments and utilities—" I cut him off. "Did I stutter, Charles? Cancel the authorizations. If they want electricity, they can pay for it. If they want a roof over their heads, they can pay for that too. Understood. Cancelled. One last thing." I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of antiseptic and freedom. "Mark my primary card, the one I use personally, as lost. Issue a new number, digital only for now. I want the old numbers scrubbed from every digital wallet and rideshare app it is linked to." Scorched earth, Charles. Consider it done. Your financial firewall is up. I ended the call and let the phone drop onto the sheets. The pain in my side was still there, but the heaviness in my heart was gone. I pictured my family laughing in their VIP box, ordering another round of drinks, oblivious to the fact that the well had just run dry. They had called me a burden. They were about to find out just how heavy life gets when you have to carry it yourself. 2 in the morning at the Gilded Lily was reserved for the city's elite. The air smelled of expensive perfume and truffle oil. My family sat in a plush velvet booth, the table littered with empty oyster shells and half-finished cocktails. They were high on the adrenaline of the concert and the illusion of wealth that my credit cards provided. Brad leaned back, loosening his silk tie, and snapped his fingers at the waiter. He demanded another bottle of their finest champagne, a vintage that cost $1,000. My father, Desmond, laughed loudly, slapping Brad on the back, calling him a man of taste. My mother, Beatrice, was busy editing a photo of her dessert for Facebook, completely ignoring the fact that her eldest daughter was recovering from life-saving surgery just a few miles away. Chantel was admiring her reflection in a spoon drunk on attention and Chardonnay. The waiter returned with the bottle and the bill. He placed the leather folder on the table with a polite nod. The total was astronomical, likely close to $2,000 for a late-night snack. Brad didn't even look at it. He slid the folder toward my father. "You get the points on this one, Des," Brad said with a wink. "We will settle up later." My father puffed out his chest, loving the role of the patriarch provider. He pulled out the heavy black card, the one linked directly to my primary account, and handed it to the waiter with a dismissive wave. "Keep the change," he said, though he had no idea what the tip actually was. 5 minutes later, the waiter returned. The polite smile was gone, replaced by a tight professional mask. "I am sorry, sir," he said loud enough for the neighboring table to hear. "This card has been declined." My father frowned, his ego bruising instantly. "That is impossible. It is a platinum account. Run it again. The chip is probably dirty." "I ran it 3 times, sir," the waiter replied, his voice dropping an octave. "The bank has flagged it as lost or stolen. It is completely frozen." A cold silence fell over the booth. My mother let out a nervous laugh. "Oh, these banks are so sensitive about travel. Here, use mine." She dug into her designer clutch and produced the gold card I paid off every month. The waiter took it and walked away. The tension at the table was palpable. Brad drummed his fingers on the tablecloth, looking everywhere but at the bill. Chantel started chewing her lip. When the waiter came back, he wasn't holding the card reader. He was holding the card between 2 fingers like it was contaminated. "This one is invalid too, ma'am. Code 41, lost or stolen. Do you have another form of payment?" My father turned to Brad. The panic was starting to set in behind his eyes. "Brad, son, there must be a glitch in the system. Can you cover this? I will wire you the money first thing in the morning." Brad froze. He patted his jacket pockets, then his pants pockets. He stood up and checked his back pockets. His face contorted into a mask of exaggerated shock. "Oh no," he said. "My wallet. I must have left it in the limo. I took it out to tip the driver when we stopped for gum." "It is in the center console. Run and get it," Chantel urged. "The driver is right outside." Brad pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. His face went pale. "The ride ended 20 minutes ago," he said. "The driver clocked out. He is gone. The limo was gone. The wallet was conveniently gone. And the waiter was now signaling for the manager." My family sat frozen in the booth, 4 people dressed in thousands of dollars of clothing, realizing they didn't have a single dime between them to pay for the champagne that was getting warm on the table. The humiliation was just beginning. The restaurant manager arrived at the table not with a dessert menu, but with 2 uniformed security guards standing discreetly behind him. He was a tall man, with a face made of granite, and he looked down at my parents with absolute disdain. "Sir," the manager said, his voice carrying across the silent dining room, "the bill is $2,400. If you cannot produce a valid form of payment within the next 5 minutes, I will be forced to call the police for theft of services. This is not a charity kitchen." My father, Desmond, turned a shade of gray I had never seen before. He was a deacon, a community leader. The idea of being handcuffed in front of the city's elite was his worst nightmare. He looked at Brad, but my brother-in-law was suddenly fascinated by the pattern on the tablecloth, muttering about bank errors and lost wallets. My mother, Beatrice, was hyperventilating, clutching her pearls. With shaking hands, Desmond pulled out his phone. He had to make the call that would strip away the last of his dignity. He dialed Marcus, his old college roommate who lived 10 minutes away. It rang and rang. Finally, a groggy voice answered. Desmond forced a laugh that sounded like a dry cough. "Hey, Marcus. So sorry to wake you, old friend. We are at the Gilded Lily, and there has been a mix-up with the banks. All of them. I need a favor. A big one." The entire restaurant seemed to be listening as my father had to beg. He had to explain that he had eaten a $1,000 meal he could not pay for. He had to ask another man to drive down in his pajamas to bail him out. I could imagine Marcus on the other end, annoyed and judging him. While they waited for their savior, my mother turned her rage toward me. She pulled out her phone, her acrylic nails clicking furiously against the screen. "I am going to kill her," she hissed. "How dare she embarrass us like this?" She dialed my number. It went straight to a busy signal. She tried again. Busy. She tried from FaceTime. Connection failed. She blocked me. My mother shrieked, her voice cracking. That ungrateful little witch blocked her own mother. Chantel tried next. Straight to voicemail. They were cut off. The Bank of Ebony was not just closed, it had been demolished. Marcus arrived 20 minutes later wearing sweatpants and a look of pure irritation. He paid the bill without looking at my father, then turned and walked out without saying goodbye. The humiliation was total. The security guards escorted my family to the curb, ensuring they left the premises. Outside, the humid Atlanta night had turned into a cold drizzle. They stood on the sidewalk, 4 people in black tie attire, looking like wet rats. Brad pulled out his phone to summon an Uber Black. He tapped the screen confidently. A second later, he cursed. "It says payment method invalid. The account is suspended." I had linked my card to his Uber account years ago for a family trip and never removed it. Now that link was gone. They tried my father's app, linked to my card, suspended. They tried Chantel, suspended. They had no cash, no working cards, no ride. And they were 5 miles from home. "We have to walk," Brad muttered, looking at his Italian loafers. "Are you insane?" Chantel screamed. "I am wearing 4-inch heels, then start walking barefoot." Brad snapped his charm, finally evaporating. I can only imagine the scene as they began their trek. My mother shielding her blowout with a dinner menu she had accidentally stolen. My father limping in his dress shoes. Chantel crying as the rain ruined her makeup, and Brad walking 10 paces ahead, already plotting his next lie. They were walking home in the rain while I slept in a warm hospital bed, finally safe from their parasitism. The long walk of shame had begun. 3 days later, the hospital discharged me. I walked out into the bright Atlanta sunlight, blinking against the glare. My side still throbbed with a dull, persistent ache where the staples held my skin together, but the antibiotic course had done its job. I was alive. I called a private car service to take me home. I did not want to rely on anyone else ever again. The drive was quiet, and I spent it staring out the window, preparing myself for the reality of single motherhood while recovering from major surgery. When I unlocked my front door, I braced myself for chaos. I expected toys scattered across the floor, sticky countertops, and a sink full of dishes. I assumed I would have to spend my first hours home cleaning up after 3 days of survival mode. Instead, I was greeted by the smell of pine cleaner and slow-cooked pot roast. The hardwood floors gleamed under the afternoon sun. My living room looked like a page out of a catalog. Mrs. Hattie was sitting in the rocking chair by the window, humming a low gospel tune while folding laundry with precise, caring movements. Leo and Maya looked up from their coloring books on the rug. They did not scream or cry in distress. They simply ran over and wrapped their arms around my legs, carefully avoiding my stomach, as if they instinctively knew I was fragile. They buried their faces in my jeans. "Mommy, you are back," Leo said, his voice muffled. "Mrs. Hattie said you needed a battery recharge." I looked at this woman who had been a complete stranger 72 hours ago. She had not just watched my children. She had nurtured them. She had restored order to a home that my own mother had left to rot. Mrs. Hattie stood up and smiled. "Welcome home, baby girl. You look better. You got some color back in your cheeks." I sat down at the kitchen table and pulled out my checkbook. I wrote a check for the agency fee, which was substantial, and then I wrote a second personal check. It was for a significant amount. A bonus. But I had another proposition. "Mrs. Hattie." I started, my voice thick with emotion. "I do not know how to thank you. You saved us. But I need to ask you something. I need someone permanent, someone I can trust. I want to hire you full-time. I will pay double whatever your agency rate is. Full benefits, Paid vacation. Please say yes. She looked at me, her wise eyes assessing the situation. You need a village, baby girl. And it looks like your current village burned down. I am in. Relief washed over me, so powerful it almost made my knees buckle. For the first time in days, I felt safe. I felt like I could actually recover without fear. We sat there in the warm kitchen, sharing a moment of genuine connection. Then the doorbell rang. It was not a friendly chime. It was a long, aggressive press followed by heavy pounding. The sound tore through the peaceful atmosphere like a knife. My stomach clenched. I knew that knock. It was not the knock of a delivery driver or a neighbor. It was the frantic, entitled pounding of people who had lost their meal ticket. The peace was over. The war had arrived at my doorstep. Mrs. Hattie opened the door, her large frame blocking the view of whoever stood on the porch. I expected my father's shouting or my mother's fake tears. Instead, I heard a deep baritone voice that I recognized from 20 years of Sunday services. It was Pastor Jenkins. Behind him stood the three pillars of the church choir, Sister Gladys, Sister Ruth, and Sister Mary, all wearing their judgmental hats and clutching leather-bound Bibles like weapons. They did not wait for an invitation. They surged past Mrs. Hattie like a holy tide, filling my living room with the scent of lavender powder and sanctimony. Pastor Jenkins stood over me where I sat on the sofa, clutching a pillow to my healing abdomen. He did not ask about my surgery. He did not ask if I was in pain. He looked at me with the grave expression of a man performing an exorcism. Sister Beatrice came to us in deep distress this morning, Ebony. He boomed, his voice vibrating off the walls. She was weeping at the altar. She says the enemy has taken hold of your heart. I stared at him, my mouth slightly open. The enemy. My mother had told the church council that I was possessed. It was brilliant in a twisted sociopathic way. She could not admit that I cut her off because she abandoned me. That would make her look bad. So she spun a narrative that the anesthesia and pain medication had twisted my mind, opening a door for dark spirits to enter. She told them I was not myself, that I was mentally unstable, and that in my confusion, I had cruelly cut off the resources my elderly parents needed to survive. She painted herself as the martyr praying for her sick, deluded daughter. Sister Gladys stepped forward, placing a heavy hand on my forehead. "We are here to pray the spirit of greed and rebellion out of you, child," she announced. "Your mother says you have left them in the dark. Literally, she says you cut the power to their home. How can you honor your father and mother by leaving them to starve in the cold?" The audacity took my breath away. They were not starving. They had a pantry full of gourmet food I had paid for. They were not in the dark. The electricity bill was not due for another week, though I had indeed canceled the autopay. But facts did not matter to this tribunal. They saw a young single mother who had lost her way, and they were here to bully me back into submission under the guise of spiritual intervention. Mrs. Hattie stepped between Sister Gladys and me, her face like a stone wall. "You will take your hand off her," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "She is recovering from major surgery. This is not a prayer meeting. This is an ambush." Pastor Jenkins drew himself up to his full height. "We are here on the Lord's business, woman. This daughter has sinned against her blood. Beatrice is devastated. She is worried for her grandchildren being raised in a house with a hard heart." That was it. They threatened my parenting. They brought my children into their manipulation. My mother had sent the church to shame me into submission, using my faith and my community as a bludgeon. She thought I would crumble under the pressure of the pastor's disapproval. She thought I would write a check just to make them leave. She was wrong. I was not the same woman who sat in the pews and nodded. I reached under the sofa cushion and pulled out a manila folder I had prepared the night before. I did not need a prayer. I needed a receipt. Pastor Jenkins was midway through a sermon about the fifth commandment about honoring thy father and mother, so that thy days may be long, when I interrupted him. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I simply held up the folder. "Pastor," I said, my voice flat, "before you continue preaching about honor, perhaps you should look at what exactly you are defending." I opened the folder and pulled out the first sheet. It was a printout of my bank statement from the last 30 days, highlighting the supplementary card expenses. I handed it to him. He took it reluctantly, looking over his reading glasses. Look at the highlighted lines, I instructed. April 10th. The Golden Tee Golf Club. $800. April 12th. Serenity Spa and Wellness. $1,200. April 15th. Neiman Marcus. $3,500. The list went on, totaling over $15,000 in 1 month. Sister Gladys peered over his shoulder, her eyes widening as she saw the numbers. That is a lot of money, she whispered. I pulled out the next sheet. It was the hospital admission record time-stamped Friday night, showing my critical condition and emergency surgery. Next to it, I placed the bank alert for the steak dinner and the concert tickets time-stamped at the exact same time. Pastor, I asked, looking him dead in the eye, does the Bible teach that parents should feast on steak and wine while their daughter is being cut open on an operating table? Does the Lord command me to fund their spa days while they refuse to watch my children during a medical emergency? The room fell silent. The righteous indignation that had filled the space moments ago evaporated, replaced by an uncomfortable shifting of weight. Pastor Jenkins looked from the statement to me, his face flushing a deep, embarrassed red. He cleared his throat, adjusting his collar. Sister Beatrice did not mention these details, he mumbled. She said you cut them off from necessities. Necessities, I repeated, pointing at the line item for a vintage bottle of Cabernet. Is a $400 bottle of wine a necessity, Pastor? Is a limousine ride a necessity? I am a single mother raising 2 children alone. I have funded their lifestyle for 5 years. I paid for their house, their cars, their vacations, and when I asked for one night of help to save my life, they told me to call an Uber. Sister Mary closed her Bible. Well, she said, her voice losing its edge, that does seem uncharitable. Pastor Jenkins handed the papers back to me. He looked defeated, his moral high ground crumbling beneath his feet. Sister Ebony, he said, his voice soft now. I apologize. We were misled. It appears there is more to this story than we were told. We will pray for your healing. He signaled to the women, and they shuffled toward the door, their heads bowed. They had come to condemn a sinner and found themselves defending gluttony. As they left, Mrs. Hattie locked the door behind them with a satisfying click. They would not be back. My mother's weaponized religion had just backfired, and now she had lost her cover. The truth was out, and it cost $15,000 to prove it. It was Tuesday evening at the house on Oak Street. I knew their routine perfectly because I had funded it for 5 years. At this hour, my father Desmond would be sitting in his recliner watching the game on the 70-inch flat-screen television I bought him for Christmas. My mother Beatrice would be scrolling through social media on the high-speed fiber optic connection I paid for, likely looking for photos of the concert to repost. They were comfortable. They were cool in the central air conditioning. They were content in the bubble of luxury I provided. Then the house went black. I was sitting at my kitchen table when it happened. I did not need to be there to see it. I had received the notification from the utility company on my laptop. Service disconnected for non-payment and breach of contract. Since I was the account holder, I had the power to terminate service at any location under my name. I had scheduled the disconnect for 7 p.m. sharp. My landline rang 12 minutes later. I stared at the caller ID. It was my father. I looked at Mrs. Hattie, who was feeding the twins their dinner. She nodded, giving me silent strength. I picked up the receiver, but I did not put it to my ear. Instead, I pressed the speakerphone button and simultaneously hit record on the digital voice recorder I had placed next to the phone. I needed everything on tape. Ebony. His voice exploded into the room, distorted by rage and static. What the hell is going on? The lights are out. The internet is down. The air conditioning just died. I checked outside and the neighbors have power. This is just our house. Did you forget to pay the bill again? Again. I had never missed a bill in my life. The audacity of his accusation made my blood boil, but I forced my voice to remain calm. I did not forget Dad. I canceled the service. The account is in my name and I am no longer paying for utilities at a residence I do not live in. There was a sputtering sound on the other end like an engine failing to start. You what? You cannot do that. Brad is here. He needs the Wi-Fi to trade stocks. He has millions on the line. You are messing with his livelihood. Turn it back on right now or I swear to God, Ebony. He was more worried about Brad's imaginary stock trades than the fact that his daughter was recovering from surgery. I leaned closer to the phone, ensuring the recorder caught every syllable. I cannot turn it back on, Dad. And I would not even if I could. You see, the situation has changed. What situation? You have plenty of money. You are just being spiteful because we went to a concert. Stop acting like a child and pay the bill. It is 90 degrees in here. I took a deep breath, preparing to deliver the lie that would expose them completely. It was a test, a cruel, necessary test. I am not being spiteful, Dad. I am broke. The surgery complications were worse than I thought. My firm let me go. I lost my job this morning. The silence on the other end was heavy. I waited. This was the moment a father should ask if I was okay. He should ask how I was going to feed his grandchildren. He should offer to help. Instead, Desmond screamed, "You lost your job. Are you kidding me? How could you be so irresponsible? What about us? How are you going to pay the mortgage on this house? We have a lifestyle, Ebony. You cannot just fail us like this." There it was, not a shred of empathy, just anger that the cash cow had stopped producing milk. "I am sorry, Dad," I said, my voice ice cold. "I cannot help you anymore. You are on your own." I hung up the phone and stopped the recording. The grief was gone. All that was left was the evidence. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a video file sent by Sarah, my senior analyst at the firm. The caption read, "You need to see this, security already handled it." I pressed play and the screen filled with the pristine glass lobby of my auditing firm. Standing at the reception desk was Chantel. She looked unhinged, wearing a dress that looked like she had slept in it, likely because the air conditioning was off at the Oak Street house. She was screaming at the receptionist, a young woman who looked absolutely terrified. "I know she works here!" Chantel shrieked, her voice cracking and echoing off the marble walls. "My sister Ebony Williams. She makes 6 figures and she cut off her own parents' electricity. Who does that? They are elderly people. They are sitting in the dark right now because she is a selfish, greedy monster." Chantel slammed her designer handbag onto the counter, knocking over a display of business cards. "Call her down here right now. Tell her Chantel is here, and I am not leaving until she writes a check. My husband Brad is a millionaire investor. We do not need her money, but it is the principal. She owes us for everything we did for her." The irony was suffocating. If Brad was a millionaire, why was Chantel screaming in a corporate lobby for utility money? The receptionist tried to speak, but Chantel cut her off. "Do not lie to me. She is hiding. She is probably counting her money while our mother cries. Tell her she is going to hell for this." That was when the head of security, Mr. Henderson, stepped into the frame. He was a massive man, a former linebacker who took his job very seriously. He did not shout. He simply loomed over Chantel, casting a shadow that seemed to swallow her whole. "You are trespassing, Mom," Mr. Henderson said, his voice a low rumble. "You have 10 seconds to vacate the premises before I physically remove you and call the police." Chantel froze. She looked around, realizing for the first time that a dozen employees were watching her meltdown. She tried to straighten her dress, attempting to regain some shred of dignity. "Fine, I am leaving," she spat. "But you tell Ebony she cannot treat family like this. We made her." She turned to leave, but decided to shove a potted plant on her way out, sending dirt spilling across the polished floor. Mr. Henderson did not hesitate. He grabbed her arm and marched her through the revolving doors, tossing her onto the sidewalk. Sarah zoomed in on Chantel's face through the glass. She looked desperate, furious, and completely defeated. I watched the video 3 times. My sister had tried to destroy my professional reputation to squeeze a few $1,000s out of me. She wanted to shame me into submission by painting me as a villain to my colleagues. Instead, she had just handed me the perfect evidence for a restraining order. I forwarded the video to my lawyer and saved it as Exhibit C. They wanted a war, but they just handed me the ammunition. My phone rang at 7 in the evening. It was an unknown number, but I knew exactly who it was. My family had run out of plays, so they were sending in the closer. I pressed the record button and answered. Brad's voice came through the speaker, smooth and condescending, like he was explaining quantum physics to a toddler. "Ebony," he sighed. "We need to have a serious conversation. I know you are feeling emotional right now. I know surgery can mess with a woman's hormones and make her irrational. I am willing to overlook the scene you caused at your office today because I know you are not yourself. You are stressed. You are a single mother. It is a lot for you to handle." I sat at my kitchen table staring at the phone in disbelief. The audacity was breathtaking. He was speaking to me as certified forensic auditor who managed multi-million-dollar accounts as if I were a hysterical child who needed a timeout. He continued his monologue without waiting for a response. "Here's the situation, Ebony. You have embarrassed your parents, and you have traumatized your sister. Chantel is inconsolable. However, I am a reasonable man. I am willing to make this entire ugly mess disappear. I will talk to your parents. I will calm Chantel down. I will make sure nobody presses charges for the assault at your office." He paused for dramatic effect. "All you have to do is transfer $5,000 to your father's account immediately. We will use it to turn the utilities back on and stock the fridge. Consider it a penalty fee for your bad behavior. If you do that, I will let this slide." I stayed silent, letting him dig his own grave. When I did not speak, he cleared his throat, and his tone shifted. The velvet glove came off. "Listen to me, Ebony. Do not make me get my legal team involved. I have attorneys on retainer who specialize in elder abuse. If you force my hand, I will sue you for everything you have left. I will take your house. I will garnish your unemployment checks. You do not want to go to war with someone in my tax bracket. You cannot afford it. $5,000. The number stuck in my head. It was a specific amount, too high for an electric bill, but too low for a millionaire investor to be threatening a lawsuit over. If Brad was as wealthy as he claimed, $5,000 should have been pocket change. He should have just paid the bills himself to play the hero. Instead, he was shaking me down. I finally spoke, my voice calm and icy. "You want $5,000 to stop harassing me, is that correct?" "I want $5,000 to fix the mess you created," he corrected sharply, "and I want it tonight. Do not test me, Ebony. I am trying to help you here. Do the smart thing." I hung up. Brad thought he was intimidating me. He thought he was the alpha male asserting dominance over a weak woman. What he did not realize was that he had just given me the first thread of the sweater I was about to unravel. A millionaire does not beg for $5,000. A millionaire does not threaten to sue for pocket change. Brad was desperate, and desperate men make mistakes. I looked at the recording on my phone. He had mentioned his legal team. He had mentioned his tax bracket. It was time to see if any of it was real. I opened my laptop and logged into the LexisNexis database. Brad wanted to talk about finances. Fine, let us look at his. I sat in the silence of my kitchen, the phantom echo of Brad's voice still hanging in the air. $5,000. The specific amount gnawed at my forensic brain. In my line of work, we are trained to look for anomalies, for patterns that break the established logic of a financial narrative. Brad's request was a glaring neon red anomaly. Think about it. Brad positioned himself as a high-flying investment banker. He wore Italian suits, drove leased luxury cars, and constantly dropped names of hedge funds and tech startups. He claimed to manage a portfolio worth millions. To a man like that, $5,000 should be nothing. It should be the equivalent of buying a round of drinks. If he truly wanted to be the hero, if he wanted to humiliate me and prove to my parents that I was unnecessary, he would have paid the utility bills himself. He would have restocked their fridge with organic produce, turned the lights back on, and said, "Do not worry about Ebony, I have got you covered." That would have been the ultimate power move. It would have solidified his position as the patriarch and made me look like the bitter broke daughter. But he did not do that. Instead, he called me. He threatened me. He begged me in his own twisted, arrogant way for cash. Why would a millionaire threaten to sue his sister-in-law over a utility bill? The legal fees for a retainer alone would cost more than the amount he was demanding. It made no fiscal sense, unless he did not have the money. The realization clicked into place like a deadbolt. Liquidity. That was the issue. Assets in long-term funds are one thing, but cash on hand is another. Even the wealthiest people have liquid cash. But Brad was acting like a man who could not access a dime. The declined card at the restaurant. The excuse about the wallet in the limo. And now this desperate shakedown for $5,000. It wasn't just that he was cheap, it was that he was broke. I stood up and walked to my home office. The pain in my side was a dull throb easily ignored now that my mind had a puzzle to solve. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. My 3 monitors flickered to life, casting a blue glow over the room. This was my domain. I spent my days hunting down embezzlers, tax cheats, and corporate fraudsters. I knew how to follow the money even when people tried very hard to hide it. Brad had made a fatal error. He had assumed I was just a grieving emotional woman. He forgot that I was a certified fraud examiner. He had challenged me on my own turf. I cracked my knuckles and pulled up my investigative tools. I started with a simple background search, but I knew I would need to go deeper. I needed to see his credit history, his liens, his judgments. I needed to know if Brad Miller was even his real name. The weeping daughter was gone. The auditor was clocked in, and I was going to audit his entire life. I sat before my laptop screen, the glow illuminating the dark office. My fingers hovered over the enter key. I had drafted the email 3 times, making sure every word was precise, every sentence a brick in the wall I was building between us. Subject line notice of cessation of financial support. The body was brief. Effective immediately. All financial assistance is terminated. Do not contact me or my children. Any further communication will be directed to my attorney. I pressed send. It was done. The final cord was cut. I expected rage. I expected guilt trips about biblical duty or family loyalty. I did not expect what came next. 10 minutes later, my phone vibrated against the mahogany desk. A single text message from my mother, Beatrice. I picked it up, bracing myself for an insult about my selfishness. Instead, I read words that made the blood freeze in my veins. You think you can starve us out, Ebony? You think you hold all the cards because you have the money? Well, I have something better. I am going to sue you for full custody of Leo and Maya. You are mentally unstable. You are on heavy narcotics. You abandoned your parents in their time of need. I will prove to the court that you are an unfit mother, and I will take those babies away from you. I dropped the phone. It clattered onto the desk, echoing in the silence. Unfit. She called me unfit. This was the woman who refused to drive 20 minutes to watch them while my appendix ruptured. This was the woman who called my children a burden because she had concert tickets. And now she wanted custody. The hypocrisy was so thick I could taste it like bile. But I saw the strategy. It was not about love. Beatrice did not want to raise twin 4-year-olds. She wanted the child support checks. She wanted control. She knew that my children were the only thing in this world that could break me. My hands shook not from fear but from a primal protective fury. She had crossed the line from toxic parent to active threat. She was weaponizing the legal system against me, using my own medical crisis as evidence of instability. She was willing to traumatize her grandchildren, dragging them through a custody battle just to get her credit cards turned back on. I looked at the photo of the twins on my desk. They were smiling, oblivious to the war being declared on their happiness. I picked up the phone again and took a screenshot of the text. Then I forwarded it to my lawyer. Beatrice wanted a court battle. She had no idea that she had just handed me the weapon that would destroy her. I was not just a daughter anymore. I was a mother protecting her cubs, and I would burn the world down before I let that woman near them again. It had been exactly 7 days since I cut the financial cord. 7 days of silence from my end, and 7 days of escalating desperation from theirs. I was sitting at the dining table finishing a plate of roasted chicken with Leo and Maya. Mrs. Hattie was humming in the kitchen rinsing dishes. The house was warm, safe, and finally peaceful, or so I thought. The sound came from the back of the house. It was the distinct click of the deadbolt turning on the patio door. My stomach dropped. In the chaos of the surgery and the aftermath, I had forgotten one crucial detail. 3 years ago, I had hidden a spare key inside a fake rock near the garden hose for emergencies. I never told them about it, but I remembered Chantel watching me hide it one afternoon when she came over to borrow wine. Before I could stand up, the kitchen door swung open. They did not creep in like thieves. They marched in like conquering heroes returning to their castle. My father Desmond led the pack wearing a suit that looked slightly wrinkled, likely because he could not afford the dry cleaner. My mother Beatrice followed with her chin held high, clutching her purse like a weapon. Chantel trailed behind her, looking sullen, and Brad brought up the rear, checking his watch, as if he had a scheduled appointment. They did not look at me. They did not look at their grandchildren who had frozen with forks halfway to their mouths. They walked straight past the dining table and into the living room. My father sat in the leather recliner, kicking his feet up. My mother took the center of the sofa, smoothing her skirt. Brad leaned against the mantel, picking up a framed photo of me and the twins, and inspecting it with a sneer. Chantel flopped onto the love seat, kicking off her heels. I stood up slowly, my hands gripping the edge of the table. The sheer violation of it took my breath away. They had broken into my home and made themselves comfortable while I was eating dinner with my children. Mrs. Hattie moved instantly. She did not say a word, but she ushered Leo and Maya off their chairs and guided them upstairs, her body shielding them from the toxic display in the living room. I walked into the living room. My heart was pounding not with fear, but with a cold, dark rage. "Get out," I said. My voice was low, but it carried through the room. "You are trespassing. Get out of my house." Desmond did not even look at me. He picked up the remote and turned on the television. "We need to talk, Ebony," he said, his eyes fixed on the screen. "And since you blocked our numbers and refused to answer the door, we had to improvise. We are not leaving until this is resolved." Beatrice nodded in agreement, picking a piece of lint off the sofa cushion. "Really, Ebony, you need to dust more often. The house is looking neglected. I suppose that is what happens when you try to do everything yourself without a husband." Brad put the photo frame back down, face down. "Look, we do not want to be here any more than you want us here," he drawled. "But we have a situation. The credit cards are still frozen, the power is still off. This little tantrum of yours has gone on long enough. We are here to help you come to your senses." They sat there surrounded by the things I had bought in the house I paid for, treating me like a rebellious teenager. They had no shame, no boundaries. They truly believed they owned me. I looked at them sitting on my furniture like kings and queens of a kingdom they had bankrupted. They thought this was an intervention. They had no idea it was an invasion and I was about to defend my territory. Desmond leaned forward in the recliner, his face set in a mask of stern authority. He looked at me, not as a daughter who had just survived a medical crisis, but as a disobedient employee who had locked the supply cabinet. "Ebony, this nonsense ends right now," he boomed, pointing a finger at me. "You are going to call the bank this instant. You are going to apologize for the confusion, and you are going to unfreeze every single card, especially the platinum one." He paused for effect, glancing at Brad, who was inspecting his fingernails with an air of bored superiority. "Brad has a critical event tonight." Desmond continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The launch party for his new hedge fund, the Capital Horizon Group. It is happening at the Ritz-Carlton in 3 hours. He needs to put down the deposit for the ballroom. $10,000. And because of your little stunt with the accounts, his liquidity is tied up in transfers." I looked at Brad. He was sitting on the arm of the sofa, shaking his leg in a rapid nervous rhythm that vibrated the entire cushion. He did not look at me. He kept his eyes on the ceiling as if he were calculating complex equations instead of plotting how to steal my money. So let me get this straight, I said, my voice flat. The millionaire investor needs his mother-in-law's credit card to pay for a party to launch a fund that supposedly manages millions. Does that sound right to you, Dad? Desmond slammed his hand on the armrest, making me jump. Do not get smart with me, girl. This is how high finance works. Money moves around. Sometimes it gets stuck. Brad is doing us a favor by letting us be part of this. This fund is going to change our lives. It is the golden ticket, and you are standing in the way because you are petty and jealous. Brad finally deigned to speak. He stood up, smoothing his suit jacket. Look, Ebony, he said, his tone dripping with condescension. I know you do not understand how these things work. You are an auditor. You look at pennies. I look at the big picture. This party is where the whales sign the contracts. If I do not have that room, I lose the investors. If I lose the investors, your parents lose their retirement upgrade. Do you really want to be the reason your mother cannot winter in Tuscany? He walked over to me, stopping just inside my personal space. I smelled his cologne, expensive and cloying, trying to cover up the scent of fear sweat. Just open the card, Ebony, he whispered. I will pay it back tomorrow when the wire clears. I promise. It was a performance. A bad one. I could see the sweat beading on his upper lip. I could see the way his eyes darted to the door. He was not a master of the universe. He was a cornered rat trying to bluff his way past a cat. And my father was eating it up, swallowing every lie, because he was so desperate to be rich, he would sell his own daughter to get there. This is the opportunity of a lifetime, Desmond shouted, standing up to join Brad. Do not ruin this for us. Open the cards, now. I looked at them. The father who demanded my money. The brother-in-law who demanded my submission. They thought they were intimidating me. They thought I would crumble under the weight of their combined masculine authority. They did not know I was already counting the seconds until I destroyed them. I looked at my father, his chest heaving with exertion from his shouting match. He looked ridiculous standing there in my living room, demanding access to credit lines he had no right to. I took a slow, deliberate step forward. The air in the room shifted. They were expecting a fight, a screaming match, or tears. They were not expecting ice. You are confused, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but cutting through the tension like a razor blade. You seem to be under the impression that you have leverage here. You seem to think you are in a position to make demands. Desmond scoffed. I am your father. That is all the leverage I need. I am the head of this family. I shook my head slowly. No, Dad. You are a guest. An intruder, actually, since you broke in. You are standing on my hardwood floors. You are breathing my air-conditioned air. You are surrounded by walls that I pay the mortgage on. I turned to my mother. Beatrice was still picking at the lint on the sofa, refusing to meet my eyes. And let us talk about the house on Oak Street. The one you are so worried about losing the power to. The one where Brad is supposedly conducting his high finance business. What about it? Beatrice snapped, looking up with a scowl. It is our home. We have lived there for 5 years. Yes, you have lived there, I agreed. But who owns it? Who is on the deed? My father laughed, a harsh barking sound. What kind of stupid question is that? It is our house. We picked it out. We decorated it. We are the ones living in it. I pressed harder. But whose name is on the title, Dad? When the property taxes come due, whose name is on the bill? When the insurance is renewed, whose signature is on the policy? He waved his hand dismissively. Details, technicalities. We are the owners in every way that matters. You just handled the paperwork because my credit was recovering. That was the deal. You helped us with the paperwork, and we allowed you to live vicariously through our success. Allowed me. The delusion was absolute. They had rewritten history so completely that they actually believed their own lies. They had erased the memory of their bankruptcy 5 years ago. They had forgotten the foreclosure of their previous home and the nights they cried on my couch because they had nowhere to go. In their minds, they were the masters of the estate and I was just the secretary filing the papers. I looked at Brad. He was smirking, enjoying the show. He thought this was just a family squabble about semantics. He had no idea that he was standing on a trap door and I was about to pull the lever. So to be clear, I said, locking eyes with my father, "You are stating for the record that the house on Oak Street belongs to you, that you are the legal and rightful owners." "Absolutely," Desmond declared, puffing out his chest. "And do not you forget it." I smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf watching a lamb wander away from the flock. "Okay," I said. "I just wanted to make sure we were all on the same page before I showed you the truth." I walked to the sideboard where I kept my important documents. I pulled out a thick binder labeled Oak Street Property. I had prepared this moment in my head 1,000 times, usually during the nights I lay awake worrying about how I would pay for their roof repairs or their landscaping fees. I placed the binder on the coffee table with a heavy thud. The sound made Chantel jump. I opened it to the first page. It was a copy of the deed. I pointed to the line labeled Grantee. "Read it." I said, my voice soft but unyielding. "Read the name." My father squinted at the paper. He adjusted his glasses. He read it once, then again. His face went slack. "It says Ebony Williams," he whispered. "That is a mistake. It should say Desmond and Beatrice Williams. We signed the papers." "You signed a lease agreement, Dad," I corrected. "A $0 lease agreement. You did not sign a mortgage. You could not sign a mortgage because your credit score was 450. Remember. Remember the casinos in Biloxi. Remember losing the house on Elm Street because you gambled away the equity." My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "We agreed never to talk about that," she hissed. "That is ancient history. We have rebuilt." "You did not rebuild anything," I snapped. "I rebuilt it for you. I bought the house on Oak Street from the bank before it went to auction. I used my savings, my bonus, and my credit to secure the loan. I put your names on the mailbox, but my name is on the deed. My name is on the mortgage. My name is on the insurance. You are tenants, guests, squatters if I decide to revoke my permission." Brad picked up the binder, flipping through the pages, frantically looking for a loophole. But there were none. I was a forensic auditor. I did not make paperwork errors. He found the tax records. Ebony Williams. He found the utility registrations. Ebony Williams. He found the insurance policy. Ebony Williams. He dropped the binder back onto the table as if it burned his fingers. "So you own it," Brad said, his voice tight. "So what? It is still their home. You gave it to them." "I lent it to them," I clarified. "I allowed them to live there rent-free for 5 years because I did not want my parents to be homeless. I paid the mortgage. I paid the taxes. I paid for the repairs. And in exchange, all I asked for was a little respect, a little gratitude. Instead, I got insults. I got used. And when I almost died, you left me alone." My father was shaking his head, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "This is a trick. You tricked us. You told us the house was ours once we got back on our feet." "I told you that you could live there as long as you needed," I said. "I never said I would transfer the title. And frankly, Dad, you never got back on your feet. You just leaned harder on me. Every time I tried to talk about finances, you shut me down. You called me controlling. You said I was trying to parent my own parents? Well, guess what? Someone had to be the adult." Chantel stood up, her face twisted in a snarl. "You are disgusting," she spat, holding this over their heads. "You planned this. You wanted to humiliate them. You wanted to be the savior so you could pull the rug out whenever you felt like it. You are sick." I looked at my sister, the golden child who had never paid a bill in her life. "No, Chantel," I said. "I wanted parents. I wanted a family. But since I did not get that, I settled for being a landlord, and my tenants just violated the lease. I reached into the folder again. This was the piece of paper that would end their comfortable charade permanently. It was a formal legal document drafted by my attorney earlier that morning. It smelled of fresh ink and finality. I slapped it onto the coffee table right next to the deed. The sound was like a gavel striking a block. This is a notice to quit. I announced, my voice steady and devoid of pity. In plain English, it is an eviction notice. You have 30 days to vacate the premises on Oak Street, 30 days to pack your clothes, your knickknacks, and that 70-inch TV you love so much. If you are not out by noon on the 30th day, the sheriff will remove you forcibly. My mother stared at the paper as if it were a venomous snake. You cannot do this, she whispered, her hands trembling. Where will we go? We are old, Ebony. We cannot start over. You should have thought about that before you left me to die, I replied. You should have thought about that before you threatened to take my children. Speaking of children, I am selling the house. The market is hot right now. The equity in that property is substantial. I am going to use that money to start a trust fund for Leo and Maya. I am going to ensure their future since their grandparents clearly have no interest in protecting them. My father looked like he was having a stroke. He stood up, swaying slightly. You are selling our home to give money to toddlers. That is insane. We built a life there. We have standing in the neighborhood. You are going to humiliate us. I am not humiliating you, Dad, I said. You humiliated yourselves. You lived a lie funded by my paycheck. Now the check has bounced. The house is going on the market next week. My realtor will be contacting you to schedule viewings. I suggest you keep the place tidy. Brad tried to laugh, but it came out as a strangled croak. You are bluffing. You would not put your own parents on the street. It is a power play. You just want us to beg. I looked him dead in the eye. I do not want you to beg, Brad. I want you to leave. I want you out of my life. I want my parents out of my house. I am done being the safety net for people who push me off cliffs. This is not a negotiation. This is an eviction. You have 30 days. Tick-tock. Chantel started to cry real ugly tears of panic. But Brad promised me a new car, she wailed. He said the investments were paying off. Now we have to move. I cannot live in an apartment, Ebony. I have standards. Your standards are not my problem anymore, I said. You have a millionaire husband, remember? Let him buy you a mansion. Or better yet, let him pay the rent on a storage unit because that is all you are going to be able to afford. I watched the realization settle over them. The denial was fading, replaced by the cold, hard truth. They were not just losing a house, they were losing their status, their comfort, their entire identity was wrapped up in a lie I had subsidized, and I had just pulled the plug. The party was over and the lights were coming on. The reality of the eviction notice did not just break my mother. It shattered her entire worldview. For a split second, the room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. Then Beatrice let out a sound that was not human. It was a guttural shriek of pure animalistic rage. Her face contorted into a mask of hatred that I did not recognize. The woman who worried about appearances, the woman who spent hours on her makeup, vanished. In her place was a desperate, violent creature, cornered and lashing out. "You ungrateful little witch!" she screamed. Her voice cracked. She lunged across the coffee table, her fingers curled into claws reaching for my face. She was not trying to slap me. She wanted to hurt me. She wanted to erase the person who had just destroyed her fantasy life. I flinched instinctively, throwing my hands up to protect my face. My abdominal muscles seized in agony around my surgical incisions. I could not fight. I could not run. I closed my eyes, bracing for the impact, bracing for the pain of my mother attacking me in my own home. But the blow never landed. There was a rush of air and a heavy thud of footsteps. I opened my eyes to see a wall of floral print fabric standing between me and my mother. Mrs. Hattie had moved with a speed that defied her size. She stood like a fortress, her broad shoulders blocking Beatrice completely. My mother crashed into Mrs. Hattie's chest and bounced off, stumbling back in shock. Mrs. Hattie did not shout. She did not panic. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small black canister. She raised it, holding it steady at eye level with my mother. It was military-grade pepper spray, the kind used for self-defense against attackers. Her thumb hovered over the trigger. "Take one more step," Mrs. Hattie said. Her voice was low, calm, and terrifyingly serious. "You take one more step toward this girl, and I will drop you right here on this rug." Beatrice gasped, her chest heaving. She looked at the canister, then up at Mrs. Hattie's face. She saw no hesitation there. Mrs. Hattie was not just a nanny. She was a grandmother who had raised generations of children, and she had zero tolerance for anyone who threatened her charges. "Get out of my way," Beatrice hissed, though her voice wavered. "This is between me and my daughter." "She is not your daughter right now," Mrs. Hattie replied. "She is a patient recovering from surgery, and you are an intruder threatening her safety. If you touch a single hair on her head, I will empty this can into your eyes. I will blind you, ma'am. Do not test me." The threat hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Mrs. Hattie was not bluffing. She stood with her feet planted apart, ready for violence if violence was required. My mother looked at the pepper spray, then at me, peeking from behind Mrs. Hattie's back. The madness in her eyes flickered and died, replaced by fear. She realized she had lost the physical advantage. She was a 60-year-old socialite facing down a woman who looked like she could lift a car. Beatrice took a shaky step back, her hands trembling. The violence had been checked, but the tension in the room was suffocating. Brad watched the scene unfold with a detached, cold calculation that was far more unsettling than my mother's hysteria. While Beatrice sobbed and gasped for air in the corner, retreating from Mrs. Hattie, Brad did not rush to comfort her. He did not check to see if his mother-in-law was injured. Instead, he slowly stood up from the mantel. He adjusted his silk tie and smoothed the lapels of his navy suit jacket with precise, practiced movements. He looked like a lawyer preparing to address a jury, or perhaps a shark circling a swimmer who had drifted too far from the boat. "You have made a grave miscalculation," Ebony Brad said. His voice was smooth and low, devoid of the panic that had infected the rest of the room. He walked toward me, stopping just outside the range of Mrs. Hattie's pepper spray. "You think because you have a deed and a bank account that you hold the power here. You think you can throw two elderly people out on the street and face no consequences. You are playing a game you do not understand." He paused, looking around the room as if gathering evidence for a case he was already building in his head. "I know the law, Ebony. I deal with contracts and liabilities every single day. What you are doing is not an eviction. It is financial exploitation of the elderly. You lured your parents into a false sense of security. You let them believe this home was theirs. You created a verbal contract of lifetime tenancy, and now you are breaching it to inflict emotional distress." My father perked up at this. He wiped his face, looking at Brad with renewed hope. "That is right," Desmond muttered. "She tricked us." Brad nodded at him, then turned his cold gaze back to me. "I have attorneys on retainer who specialize in this kind of litigation. Ferocious litigators who eat amateurs like you for breakfast. I will file an emergency injunction tomorrow morning to stop the sale of the house. Then I will file a civil suit for damages. By the time I am done with you, you will not only lose the house on Oak Street, you will lose this house too. I will tie up your assets in court for years. I will bleed you dry with legal fees until you are begging for mercy." He took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. "You forget who I am, Ebony. I have resources you cannot even imagine. I have capital. I have connections. I will use every cent of my fortune to bury you. I will make it my personal mission to ensure you never work in this town again. I will destroy your credit, your reputation, and your future." "You wanted a war. Congratulations. You just declared one on a man who has never lost a battle." I stood there listening to his threats. A part of me, the part that was still recovering from surgery and trauma, wanted to shrink away. His confidence was terrifying. He spoke with the absolute certainty of a man who truly believed he was untouchable. He painted a picture of my destruction that was detailed and plausible. For a moment, I wondered if I had overplayed my hand. I wondered if his money really could silence the truth. Brad checked his watch again, dismissing me. Come on, Desmond. Beatrice. We are leaving. We do not need to stand here and be threatened by the help. We will handle this in court. He offered his arm to my mother, playing the gallant savior. As he led them toward the door, he looked back at me one last time. Enjoy your victory tonight, Ebony. It will be your last. When the sheriff comes next time, he will be coming for you. Brad held the door open for my parents, his face a mask of smug superiority. He looked like a general leading a tactical retreat, convinced he had already won the war. My parents shuffled out past him, my mother still clutching her chest as if she were the victim of a violent assault rather than the instigator. Desmond would not even look at me, his shame buried under layers of entitlement. I thought it was over. I thought the silence would finally descend. But Chantel lingered. My little sister, the baby I had carried on my hip when our mother was too tired, the girl whose tuition I had paid, whose mistakes I had fixed, stopped in the doorway. She turned slowly. Her eyes, usually wide and vacant, were now narrowed into slits of pure, unadulterated hatred. She looked at me up and down, taking in my comfortable clothes, my makeup-free face, and the bandage barely visible under my shirt. She sneered. "You are pathetic," she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "You stand there acting like you are better than us just because you have a job and a house. But we all know what this is really about. We know why you are doing this." I stared at her, saying nothing. I refused to give her the satisfaction of a response. "You are jealous," Chantel hissed, stepping closer, her finger jabbing the air. "You are eating your heart out because I won. I got the prize. I married a rich white husband who takes care of me. I live a life of luxury that you have to work 80 hours a week to pretend to have. You look at Brad, and you look at me, and you hate that you are alone." The words hit a nerve I did not know was exposed. She was attacking my grief. She was mocking the memory of my late husband, a good man who worked himself into an early grave to provide for us. "You are just a black widow with bad luck," Chantel continued, her voice rising to a screech. "Misery loves company, Ebony, and you are the most miserable person I know. Nobody wants you, not Mom, not Dad, and certainly not a man. You are just a bitter ATM machine. Honestly, it would have been better for everyone if you had just died on that table last week. You would be better off dead than living this sad, lonely life." The air left the room. Even Brad looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight by the door. Mrs. Hattie gasped, a sharp intake of breath that sounded like a gunshot. Telling someone they should have died, telling a sister she was better off dead, was a line you could never uncross. It was the final nail in the coffin of our relationship. Chantel spun on her heel, her hair whipping around her face, and marched out the door. Brad followed, slamming it shut behind them with a force that rattled the windows. The lock clicked. They were gone. I stood frozen in the middle of my living room. The echo of her words bounced around my skull. That was what my sister thought of me. That was the sum total of my worth to her. If I were dead, they would probably just be angry that the life insurance payout took too long to clear. I felt a hand on my shoulder. Mrs. Hattie was there, solid and warm. She did not offer empty platitudes. She did not tell me they did not mean it. She knew they meant every word. "That girl has poison in her blood," Mrs. Hattie said quietly. "But poison only kills if you drink it. Do not you drink it, baby girl. You spit it out." I looked at the closed door. The trembling in my hands stopped. The shock faded, replaced by a cold, mechanical precision. Chantel thought she had won because she married a rich man. She thought Brad was her shield. She had no idea that her shield was made of paper, and I was about to light the match. I turned to Mrs. Hattie. "Put the kids to bed," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "I have work to do." I walked to my home office and locked the door. I sat down at my desk and woke up my computer. The screens glowed blue in the darkness. Brad had threatened me with the law. Chantel had mocked me with her husband's wealth. They had made it personal. They had made it about money and status. Fine. If they wanted to talk about money, I would show them exactly where it came from, and more importantly, where it was going. I opened the database again. I cracked my knuckles. It was time to peel back the layers of Brad Miller's life and see what was rotting underneath. The silence that followed the slamming of the front door was heavy, pressing against my eardrums like deep water. My legs finally gave out and I sank onto the sofa, my entire body vibrating with the aftershocks of the confrontation. The physical pain in my abdomen was a dull roar, but it was nothing compared to the evisceration of my heart. Better off dead. My sister's words echoed in the empty room, bouncing off the walls of the house I had bought to protect them. She wished death on me. My mother had tried to assault me. My father had stood by and watched. And Brad had threatened to destroy the only life I had left. Mrs. Hattie came down the stairs, Leo and Maya trailing behind her like little ducklings. They sensed the danger the way animals sense a storm. They did not ask where their grandparents went. They just ran to me. Mommy Maya whined, climbing into my lap and wrapping her small arms around my neck. Leo pressed his face into my shoulder. I held them so tight I was afraid I might bruise them. I buried my face in their hair, inhaling the scent of baby shampoo and innocence. They were the only reality that mattered. They were the reason I was still breathing. I rocked them back and forth, tears leaking silently into their pajamas. For a moment, I was just a terrified mother, a widow standing alone against a pack of wolves who wanted to devour everything I had built. But then Brad's voice cut through the grief in my mind. I know the law. I will sue you for damages. I will bleed you dry. He had threatened to use the legal system as a weapon. He had invoked attorneys' injunctions and financial ruin. He thought those words would paralyze me. He thought I was just a checkbook with a pulse. He had made a critical error. He forgot who I was when I was not being a daughter or a sister. He forgot that from 9 to 5, I was not a victim. I was a predator. I was a forensic auditor. I spent my days dissecting the lives of men who thought they were smarter than the system. I tracked hidden assets for a living. I found the lies buried in ledgers. Brad had walked into my house and threatened me with the very tools I used to hunt people down. The trembling in my hands stopped. The tears dried on my cheeks, leaving my skin tight and cold. I kissed the twins on their foreheads and gently untangled their arms. Go with Mrs. Hattie, I said, my voice steady and unrecognizable even to myself. Mommy has to do some work. Mrs. Hattie looked at me. She saw the shift. She saw the grief recede and the steel take its place. She nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of the soldier preparing for battle, and led the children away. I walked into my home office and locked the door. The click of the lock was the sound of a vault closing. I sat in my high-backed leather chair and woke up my workstation. 3 monitors flared to life, casting a stark blue glow across the room. I was not shaking anymore. I was calibrated. Brad wanted a legal battle. He wanted to talk about assets and liabilities. Fine. I cracked my knuckles and opened my secure terminal. I logged into the LexisNexis database, the tool of my trade. I typed in his name. Okay, Brad, I whispered to the humming hard drive. You want to play by the rules? Let us see if you followed them. My home office was a sanctuary of silence and order, a stark contrast to the chaotic emotional violence that had just taken place in my living room. I sat in my ergonomic leather chair, the only piece of furniture in the house that truly held me up. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of ozone from the cooling fans of my server tower. This was my domain. Out there, I was a daughter and a sister and a punching bag. In here, I was a weapon. I reached into the bottom drawer of my desk and retrieved my RSA security token, the small device that generated the rolling encryption codes I needed to access the firm's secure servers. The red numbers on the fob flickered and changed every 60 seconds. It was a heartbeat of data. I logged into the system. The screen went black for a moment before the familiar interface of the forensic portal loaded. Most people think background checks are something you buy for $20 on a sketchy website. They think if you have a LinkedIn profile and a photo in a suit, you are legitimate. I operated in a different world. I had access to LexisNexis Accurant and TLXP databases that stripped away the public persona and revealed the raw, ugly data beneath. These tools could find a hidden bank account in the Caymans or a parking ticket from 1998. Brad had made the classic mistake of the amateur con artist. He assumed that because he was loud, he was invisible. He thought his threats of high-powered attorneys and bottomless resources would scare me into submission. He did not realize that threats are just data points, and data points can be verified. He had told me he was a millionaire. He had told me he ran a hedge fund called the Capital Horizon Group. He had told me he had assets. I was about to audit his existence. I cracked my knuckles, a habit I picked up during my first year at the firm when I was hunting down a Ponzi scheme operator in Miami. I placed my hands on the keyboard. I did not start with his business. I started with the man. I typed in the name. Bradley Jameson Miller. Current address, Oak Street, Atlanta, Georgia. I hit the enter key with a force that felt like pulling a trigger. The system churned. The progress bar crept across the screen, searching through county records, state filings, federal databases, and credit bureaus. I watched the cursor blink. My heart rate slowed down. The physical pain in my incision receded into the background, replaced by the cold dopamine rush of the hunt. I was not looking for gossip. I was looking for the paper trail. Money leaves footprints. Debt leaves scars. And lies, no matter how well told, always leave a gap in the timeline. The screen flashed and the preliminary report populated. It was a wall of text, addresses, associates, liens, judgments. I leaned in closer, my eyes scanning the summary. The first thing I looked for was the employment history and the credit score. If Brad was the financial titan he claimed to be, his file should have been thick with property deeds, investment holdings, and a credit score in the 800s. Instead, what I saw made me let out a short, sharp laugh. It was not a portfolio. It was a rap sheet of financial failure. The man who had threatened to bury me with his money did not even own the suit he was wearing. I scrolled down, ready to dissect the anatomy of a fraud. I started with the most basic requirement for anyone claiming to manage money. In the United States, you cannot simply wake up and decide to be an investment banker. You need licenses. You need to be registered with the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority. I opened the broker check database, which is a public ledger of every licensed financial advisor in the country. I typed in Bradley Miller. The search wheel spun for a fraction of a second and returned a result that made me smile for the first time in days. No records found. I tried every variation. Brad Miller, BJ Miller. I tried searching by his social security number, which I had obtained from the tax documents he carelessly left on my dining table years ago. The result was the same. 0. The man who claimed to be a master of the universe did not have a Series 7 license. He did not have a Series 63. He was not legally allowed to manage a piggy bank, let alone a hedge fund. He was a ghost in the financial system. Next, I went after his company. He always handed out these heavy matte finish business cards that read CEO of BM Capital. My parents treated those cards like holy relics. I pulled up the Georgia Secretary of State corporate filings. I found the entry for BM Capital LLC. It was active, but when I looked at the details, the facade began to crumble. The company had reported 0 revenue for 3 consecutive years. It had no employees other than Brad himself. But the real smoking gun was the address. The principal office address was listed as Suite 404 at a location in Decatur. I copied the address into Google Maps and switched to Street View. I expected an office park or at least a co-working space. What I saw was a dilapidated strip mall next to a pawn shop and a liquor store with bars on the windows. I zoomed in on the storefront. It was a pack and ship store. Suite 404 was not an office. It was a $19 a month rental mailbox. The headquarters of his global financial empire was a metal box measuring 6 inches by 6 inches in a slum. I dug deeper into his employment history using the TLOXP database, which tracks payroll and tax records. The last time Brad Miller received a legitimate paycheck was exactly 24 months ago. And it was not from Goldman Sachs. The employer of record was Big Al's Discount Auto Sales. His title was Junior Sales Associate. The employment status was marked involuntary termination. The truth hit me like a physical blow. Brad was not an investor. He was a used car salesman who had been fired 2 years ago, likely for being as incompetent as he was arrogant. For 2 years he had been playing dress-up. He had been putting on a suit every morning, kissing my sister goodbye, and driving to a coffee shop or a park to pretend he was working. He had no income, no assets, no future. He was financing his entire life on credit card debt and the generosity of the family he was leeching off of. He was a complete fraud, a hollow man. And he had made the fatal mistake of threatening the one person who could see right through him. I stared at the screen, trying to reconcile the image of the arrogant man in the bespoke suit with the financial wreckage in front of me. Brad had no job and no company, but he had expenses, massive ones. I switched tabs to the civil court records database. If he wasn't making money legally, he was getting it from somewhere else, and usually when people live beyond their means, they leave a trail of broken promises and angry creditors. The search results populated instantly, and the list was long enough to print a novel. There were 3 separate judgments against him in the last 18 months. But it was the plaintiff names that told the real story. These were not banks or credit card companies. They were limited liability companies with vague names like VK Holdings and Sapphire Solutions, registered in places like Malta and Curaçao. To the untrained eye, they looked like generic business disputes. To a fraud examiner, they screamed one thing: offshore online gambling. I dug deeper into the filings. The numbers were staggering: 20,000 here, 50,000 there. The total outstanding principal was just over $200,000. Brad wasn't trading stocks. He wasn't analyzing market trends or building a hedge fund. He was sitting in the dark, likely on his phone, betting money he didn't have on sports games and poker hands. He was a degenerate gambler chasing a high that had already cost him his career and his dignity. Then I saw the most recent filing. It was from a collection agency known for being aggressive. They had filed a motion to garnish wages, which was ironic since he had none, but they were also seeking to seize assets. They were closing in on him. The timeline made perfect sense now. The desperation in his voice when he asked for that $5,000, the sweat on his upper lip, the way he panicked when the credit card was declined at the restaurant. He wasn't trying to pay the electric bill for my parents. He needed $5,000 to pay the vigorish the weekly interest on a loan from a loan shark or a bookie to keep them from breaking his legs. He was drowning. He had likely maxed out every card he could get his hands on, including the ones under my name. He was using my credit line not just to buy champagne but to pay off dangerous men. The realization made me cold. This wasn't just about him being a leech. It was about safety. He had brought this criminal element into our orbit. If he couldn't pay these people, they wouldn't just send angry letters. They would come looking for collateral. And right now, the only collateral he had access to was my parents' house, and by extension, me. I looked at the judgment dates. The most recent one was filed 3 days ago. That was why he broke into my house. He wasn't just entitled, he was terrified. He was a cornered animal, caught between the lies he told his wife and the violent reality of his debts. He was using the illusion of wealth to keep the wolves at bay, but the walls were crumbling. I sat back in my chair, my eyes fixed on the sum total of his ruin. $200,000. He was not a millionaire. He was a liability. And he was about to drag my entire family down with him if I didn't cut the rope. I saved the documents to a new folder named the Brad File. He wanted to sue me for fraud. I almost laughed. I was about to show him what a real investigation looked like. I closed the tab on Brad's gambling debts and opened a new window. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my hands remained steady. I needed to check the collateral. If Brad was $200,000 in the hole and desperate enough to break into my home, he was certainly desperate enough to go after the only significant asset my family had access to, the house on Oak Street. I navigated to the County Recorder of Deeds website. This is the public ledger where every property transaction in the state is logged. Mortgages, liens, title transfers. If anyone touches a piece of land, it gets recorded here. I entered the parcel number for the Oak Street property. I expected to see the original deed from 5 years ago when I bought the house. I expected to see the property tax records I had paid faithfully. What I found made the bile rise in my throat. There was a recent filing, a timestamp from exactly 14 days ago. It was a uniform residential loan application specifically for a home equity line of credit. A second mortgage. The amount requested was $150,000. I clicked on the document icon and waited for the PDF to load. The spinning wheel felt like it was mocking me. When the image finally popped onto the screen, I stopped breathing. The application listed the borrower as Ebony Williams. That was me. But the contact information was wrong. The phone number listed was a prepaid burner cell. The email address was meaningless alphanumeric gibberish hosted on a free server. And then I scrolled down to the signature block. There it was. My name, scrawled in blue ink. It was a good attempt. To a stranger it might have looked legitimate. But I knew the unique loop of my own L and the sharp angle of my W. This was a forgery. A clumsy, frantic forgery made by someone whose hand was shaking. I looked at the date again. 2 weeks ago. That was the day I was admitted to the hospital. That was the day I was septic and unconscious. While I was fighting for my life while doctors were cutting me open, Brad had been busy. He hadn't been praying. He hadn't been comforting his wife. He had been printing out loan documents, forging my signature, and trying to steal the equity out of my house. He must have thought it was perfect. I was incapacitated. If I died, he could claim I signed it before the surgery. If I lived, he probably hoped to intercept the mail and hide the statements. He was trying to cash out the house from under me to pay off his bookies. But he had failed. The document had a large red stamp across the top that read, "Rejected." I read the underwriter's notes in the margin. Identity verification failed. Unable to confirm employment via phone. Applicant did not answer security questions. Brad had tried to impersonate me on the verification call and failed. He didn't know my mother's maiden name because he never listened when she talked. He didn't know the name of my first pet. His arrogance had tripped him up. He thought he could outsmart a bank's fraud department with a fake signature and a borrowed suit. I sat back in my chair staring at the screen. This changed everything. The gambling debt was gross. The verbal abuse was painful. But this was a felony. This was mortgage fraud. This was identity theft. This was bank fraud. Brad hadn't just been mean to me. He had committed a federal crime using my name. He had tried to sell my financial future to save his own skin. I saved the PDF to the folder. I had him. I had him dead to rights. I wasn't just going to evict them anymore. I was going to send him to prison. And the best part was, he had no idea I knew. He was sleeping in a hotel room right now, thinking he was safe, thinking he could bully me into submission. He did not know that I held the smoking gun in my hand. The audit was complete. It was time to present the findings. I zoomed in on the document until the pixels blurred. On the signature page right below my clumsy forged autograph were 2 other signatures. They were genuine. I recognized the flourishes in my father's D and the tight loops of my mother's B. Desmond and Beatrice Williams had signed as witnesses and co-guarantors on the loan application. The nausea returned, but this time it was mixed with a cold clarity. I closed my eyes and I could see the scene play out in my mind, as if I had been standing in the room. Brad must have waited for the right moment. Perhaps it was after a good meal when their guard was down and their greed was high. He would have placed the stack of papers on the coffee table burying the loan application in a pile of meaningless jargon. He would have told them it was a formality. He would have used words like leverage and asset allocation. He probably told them that to unlock the millions in his hedge fund, he needed their permission to use the house as temporary collateral for a bridge loan. He would have called it an investment authorization. He would have promised them that the money would be in the account for 48 hours tops before bouncing back with a massive profit. And they believed him. They believed him because they wanted to believe him. They were so desperate to be the wealthy socialites they pretended to be that they signed their names without reading the fine print. They signed a document that authorized a bank to put a lien on the home they lived in. They were willing to leverage the roof over their heads to fund Brad's imaginary empire. But here was the twist, the beautiful tragic twist. They had failed for one simple reason. The house did not belong to them. I looked at the rejection stamp again. Title search failed. Property vested in Ebony Williams. If I had given in to their demands 5 years ago, this story would have a very different ending. If I had put their names on the deed as they had begged and screamed for me to do, the bank would have accepted the application. The loan would have been approved. Brad would have taken the $150,000. He would have lost it gambling within a week. And when the payments came due and Brad had vanished, the bank would have foreclosed. My parents would be on the street not because of an eviction notice, but because they had unknowingly sold their home to a con artist. My stubbornness had saved them. The very thing they hated me for, the fact that I kept the house in my name, was the only shield they had left. I had protected them from their own stupidity and from the predator they invited to dinner every Sunday. Brad knew the house was in my name, which was why he forged my signature, but he needed their signatures to create the illusion of family consent. He tried to bypass the ownership issue by hoping the bank would not look too closely at the deed. He gambled on the bank's incompetence, and he lost. I sat there staring at the evidence of their betrayal. They were ready to risk everything for Brad. They trusted the man who was lying to them and attacked the daughter who was housing them. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but at least now I knew the stakes. This was not just a family dispute anymore. This was a crime scene. And I was the only one who knew where the bodies were buried. I sat back in my chair, rubbing my temples where a headache was beginning to form. I had the financial records and the legal filings, but I needed to know his next move. A man with that much debt and a failed fraud attempt does not just sit still, he runs. I looked at the guest laptop sitting on the corner of my desk. It was the machine I let the twins watch cartoons on, but during the invasion of my home earlier that evening, I had seen Brad typing on it furiously while my parents watched television. He had probably been checking his accounts hoping for a miracle wire transfer. I pulled the laptop toward me and opened the browser. I clicked on the History tab. My heart skipped a beat. There it was, Gmail. He had logged in to check his messages, and in his arrogance, or perhaps his panic, he had closed the window without logging out. The session cookie was still active. I clicked the link. The inbox loaded instantly, exposing the private digital life of Bradley Miller. It was a graveyard of desperation. There were dozens of unread emails from collection agencies, payday lenders, and angry bookies. Subject lines like "final notice" and "urgent legal action" filled the screen. But I ignored those. I was looking for something recent, something that explained his sudden intense pressure to get $5,000 tonight. I found it in the trash folder. He had deleted it hoping to hide his tracks, but he forgot to empty the bin. It was a confirmation email from an airline. "Your flight to Mexico City is confirmed." I opened the email. The flight was scheduled for this coming Sunday at 6 in the morning. That was 3 days away. I scanned the passenger details looking for my sister's name. I expected to see Chantel Miller listed next to him. I expected to see a romantic getaway, or perhaps a delusional attempt to flee together. But there was only one name on the ticket: Bradley Miller. I checked the return flight field. It was blank. One way. The realization hit me with the force of a slap. He was not planning to fight for the house. He was not planning to launch a hedge fund. He was cashing out. The $5,000 he demanded from me was not for a deposit on a ballroom. It was his escape fund. He needed cash to survive the first few weeks in Mexico before he disappeared completely. He was going to leave them. He was going to leave Chantel behind to deal with the eviction, the shame, and the debt collectors who were undoubtedly going to come knocking on her door. The sister who had just mocked me for being a widow was about to be abandoned by her husband. He was going to leave my parents destitute after spending years draining their resources. He was cutting the anchor and letting the ship sink with his wife and in-laws still on board. I sat there staring at the screen, feeling a strange mixture of vindication and pity. Chantel was cruel, she was vain, and she was selfish, but she was still my sister. She believed in this man. She built her entire identity around being the wife of a successful investor. She had no idea that while she was screaming at me to defend his honor, he was printing a boarding pass to a life without her. Brad was not just a fraud. He was a coward of the highest order. He was willing to destroy 3 generations of his own family just to save his own skin. I took a screenshot of the flight confirmation. I forwarded it to my own secure server. The puzzle was complete. I had the motive, I had the method, and now I had the timeline. He thought he was leaving on Sunday. He was wrong. He was not going anywhere. I picked up my phone. It was time to make a call, but not to the police. Not yet. I had one more stop to make before the law got involved. I needed to see the look on his face when the house of cards finally fell. The Sunday morning service at Greater Hope Baptist Church was always a spectacle, but today it felt like a theatrical production. The sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting multicolored beams across the packed pews. The air was thick with the scent of perfume and floor wax. In the very front row, sitting in the reserved seats usually kept for the deacons, sat my family. They looked like royalty holding court. My father, Desmond, wore his best 3-piece suit, ignoring the fact that he had to dress in the dark that morning because the power at the Oak Street house was still cut off. My mother, Beatrice, wore a hat so large it blocked the view of the person behind her. She sat with her chin high, radiating a smug superiority. Next to them sat Chantel. She was glowing. She wore a white dress and enough jewelry to pay off a significant portion of the debt Brad was hiding. She kept turning her head, scanning the congregation, making sure everyone saw her, making sure they knew she was the wife of the important man on stage. She looked at the other women with pity, convinced that she had won the lottery of life. She had the ring, the clothes, and the millionaire husband. She had no idea that her carriage was about to turn back into a pumpkin. Brad stood behind the heavy oak pulpit, gripping the sides with confident hands. He looked impeccable. His suit was tailored, his hair was perfect, and his smile was dazzling. He waited for the applause to die down, letting the silence build, anticipating his words. He was in his element. For a narcissist like Brad, there was no drug more potent than the adoration of a crowd. Brothers and sisters, Brad began, his voice smooth and projecting to the back of the room without effort. God has been good to me this year. He has blessed my business Capital Horizon Group with abundance beyond measure. We have seen returns that the world says are impossible. But I know where those blessings come from. He paused, looking up toward the ceiling, acting out a moment of pious reflection. A ripple of amens went through the crowd. My mother dabbed at her dry eyes with a handkerchief, performing the role of the proud mother-in-law to perfection. The Bible says, "To whom much is given, much is required." Brad continued, his voice rising with passion. I do not want to just hoard this wealth. I want to sow into this ground. That is why today I am pledging a personal donation of $50,000 to the church building fund. The congregation gasped. People stood up and clapped. $50,000 was a fortune to this community. It was enough to fix the roof and upgrade the youth center. Brad held up a hand for silence, basking in the glory. But I want to do more, he said, leaning into the microphone. I want to help you all achieve financial freedom. I am opening a special investment allocation just for the members of this church. I want to help you multiply your savings just like I have. I am doing this because I love this family. It was a masterclass in manipulation. He was using their faith to disarm them. He was promising a donation he did not have to gain their trust so he could steal their savings before he ran. He was looking at elderly women and seeing prey. He was looking at hard-working fathers and seeing marks. And my family sat there inflating with pride, completely unaware that they were accomplices to a crime in progress. Brad winked at Chantel and she blew him a kiss. The scene was so perfect, so wrapped in lies that it made my skin crawl. They thought they were on top of the world. They did not know the ground was about to open up beneath them. The applause was deafening as I pushed open the heavy oak doors at the back of the sanctuary. The sound cut through the celebration like a knife. I did not come alone. Flanking me were two men in dark suits who moved with the distinct disciplined walk of law enforcement. They were plainclothes detectives, but to anyone paying attention, the badge on their belts was visible. I walked down the center aisle, my heels clicking against the hardwood floor, a rhythmic countdown to destruction. Heads turned. The clapping faltered and died out. My mother Beatrice twisted in her seat, ready to scowl at me for being late, but her expression froze when she saw the men behind me. Chantel looked confused, her smile wavering. Brad, standing high on the pulpit, gripped the sides of the podium so hard his knuckles turned white. He saw the detectives and he knew the hunter had become the hunted. I stopped at the front of the church right below the stage. Pastor Jenkins looked down at me, his brow furrowed. Sister Ebony, he said into the microphone, his voice booming. We are in the middle of a testimony. I know, Pastor. I said, my voice steady and amplified by the silence of the room. I apologize for the interruption. But the congregation deserves to know exactly who they are applauding. And they deserve to know where that money is really going. May I? I held up a tablet connected to the church's audio-visual system via Bluetooth. I had set it up with the sound technician 5 minutes ago, showing him the warrant to get his cooperation. Before the pastor could object, I tapped the screen. The massive projection screen behind the choir loft flickered and changed. Gone was the image of a dove. In its place appeared a mugshot. It was Brad, but younger and less polished. The text next to it was legible even from the back row. Wanted for felony wire fraud and grand larceny. State of Florida. Status active. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. Brad took a step back, knocking over his water glass. I swiped the screen. The next image was a screenshot of the flight confirmation I had found in his trash folder. Brad Miller. One-way ticket. Atlanta to Mexico City. Departing Sunday. That is today, I said, pointing at the screen. While he is asking you for investment money, he has a bag packed in his car to flee the country. He is not building a fund, he is building an escape route. I swiped one last time. This was the dagger. It was a thread of text messages recovered from his cloud backup. Messages sent to his bookie just 2 days ago. The text on the screen was cruel and explicit. I just need to squeeze the idiots for a little more cash, Brad had written. My wife is a moron and her parents are senile parasites. Once I get their savings, I am gone. I will leave them to rot in the dark. I looked at my family in the front row. The effect was devastating. Chantel was staring at the screen, reading the words over and over. My wife is a moron. The color had drained from her face, leaving her looking gray and sick. My father Desmond was clutching his chest, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. My mother looked at Brad with a horror that was absolute. The man she had championed, the man she had loved more than her own daughter, had called her a senile parasite. The silence in the church was heavy and suffocating. Brad stood on the stage, stripped of his lies, exposed as a conman and a fugitive. He looked at the side exit, but the 2 detectives had already moved to block the doors. There was nowhere left to run. The truth was out, and it was projected in high definition for the world to see. Brad did not surrender with dignity. The moment the evidence flashed on the screen, he abandoned the facade of the polished businessman. He shoved Pastor Jenkins aside, knocking the Holy Bible to the floor with a heavy thud, and scrambled toward the choir exit. He looked like a rat trying to escape a sinking ship, but he was not fast enough. The detectives moved with practiced efficiency. One of them vaulted onto the stage and tackled him before he could reach the heavy velvet curtains. The sound of the struggle was amplified by the microphone, creating a chaotic mix of grunts and thuds that echoed through the stunned sanctuary. "Get off me!" Brad screamed, his face pressed against the carpet where Holy Communion was usually served. "Do not touch me." It was her idea. It was all Chantel. She forced me to do it. She wanted the clothes. She wanted the lifestyle. I am the victim here. As the officers hauled him to his feet, clicking the handcuffs onto his wrists, he looked like a feral animal. His suit was rumpled, his tie was askew, and his hair was wild. He looked at Chantel with eyes full of hate. "Tell them," he spat at her. "Tell them how you begged for the money. You are the greedy one. I did this for you." Chantel stood frozen in the front row, her hands covering her mouth as if to hold back a scream. She looked at the man she had worshipped, the man she had mocked me for not having, and saw a stranger. One of the detectives, a man with a kind but serious face, stepped toward her, holding a clipboard. "Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "We also have a warrant for his arrest regarding identity theft. He opened a credit line in your name 3 months ago using your social security number. He has racked up $50,000 in high-interest loans from unauthorized lenders. You are not his partner, Mom. You are his victim. He used your credit to fund his gambling." Chantel's knees gave out. She did not faint, she simply crumbled. She sank to the floor in her expensive white dress, sobbing uncontrollably. The weight of the betrayal was physical. The man she loved had not only planned to leave her, he had stolen her identity. He had turned her into a debtor without her knowledge. She wailed a sound of pure heartbreak that made the congregation look away in discomfort. In the row behind her, the reality hit my father like a sledgehammer. Desmond Williams had spent years bragging about his son-in-law. He had tied his self-worth to Brad's success. He had insulted me and cut me out because he believed Brad was the golden ticket. Now, watching the police drag Brad away, seeing the proof of the deception, his body rebelled. He clutched his left arm, his face turning a terrifying shade of ashen gray. "My chest," he gasped, his voice barely a whisper. "I cannot breathe," Beatrice screamed. "Desmond, someone help him, he is having a heart attack." Chaos erupted. Deacons rushed to my father, fanning him with church programs. Someone called for an ambulance. I stood by the audiovisual booth watching the house of cards collapse. It was a scene of absolute devastation. My sister was on the floor, destroyed by the truth. My father was gasping for air, destroyed by his own pride. My mother was shrieking in panic, and Brad was being marched out the side door, cursing everyone but himself. I did not feel joy. I felt a heavy, somber resolution. I had stopped the infection, but the patient was already critical. They had wanted the truth, and now they were choking on it. The morning air was crisp on the front porch where I stood holding a mug of tea. It had been 7 days since the police took Brad away in handcuffs. 7 days of silence. But I knew it would not last. And right on cue, a taxi pulled up to the curb. It was not a limousine. It was a beat-up yellow cab. My parents and Chantel climbed out. They looked like ghosts of their former selves. My father, Desmond, moved slowly, leaning heavily on a cane. My mother, Beatrice, wore no makeup, her face puffy from crying. Chantel looked small, stripped of her jewelry, and her arrogance, wearing jeans and a t-shirt. They walked up the driveway, their heads bowed. They did not pound on the door this time. They knocked gently, timidly. I opened the door, but I did not step aside to let them in. I stood in the threshold, the master of my domain. "Ebony," my mother began, her voice cracking. "We are so sorry. We were blind. We did not know. Please, baby girl, you have to help us. Brad left us with nothing. The creditors are calling every hour. We have nowhere to go. We just want to go home to Oak Street. We will be good. We promise. Chantel stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. He stole my identity, Ebony. I am ruined. I need my big sister. Please let us stay. I looked at them. I felt a flicker of pity, but it was distant like watching a sad movie. The anger was gone, but the trust was gone too. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I have some news, I said, my voice calm. You cannot go back to Oak Street. Not really. I signed the closing papers at 9 o'clock this morning. Desmond looked up, his eyes widening. You sold it. I sold it, I confirmed. An investment group bought it for cash. They are planning to renovate. They have agreed to give you 3 days to vacate the property. That is 72 hours to pack your things and find a new arrangement. After that, the locks will be changed and anything left inside will be thrown away. 3 days, my mother gasped. But where will we go? We have no money. I reached into my pocket again. I pulled out 4 $50 bills. $200. I held it out to my father. Here, I said. This should cover bus tickets to Aunt Sarah's house in Alabama. She always said she had room for family. I suggest you call her before you get on the bus. Ebony, please, my father begged, ignoring the money. Do not do this. We are your blood. I pressed the money into his hand. You are my blood, I agreed. But I am no longer your bank, and I am certainly not your doormat. Good luck. I stepped back and closed the heavy wooden door. I turned the deadbolt. Click. It was the sound of a chapter ending. 48 hours later, the scenery changed. The smell of pine and rain was replaced by the scent of salt water and coconut sunscreen. I sat on a lounge chair on the white sands of Maui, watching Leo and Maya build a sandcastle near the surf. They were laughing, their joy unburdened by family drama. The sun was warm on my skin. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. It was buzzing with missed calls from unknown numbers, likely my family realizing the reality of their situation. I looked at the screen one last time. Then I held down the power button. The screen went black. I tossed the phone back into the bag and stood up, running toward the water to join my children. I was finally free. The most powerful lesson from Ebony's journey is that sharing DNA does not give anyone a license to destroy your peace. We often cling to toxic relationships out of a misplaced sense of duty, believing that family always comes first. But Ebony showed us that true loyalty cannot exist without respect. By enabling her parents and tolerating her sister's cruelty, she was not helping them, she was only financing their delusions. It was not until she closed her wallet and opened her eyes to the hard truth that she reclaimed her power. This story is a reminder that setting boundaries is not an act of selfishness, it is an act of survival. You cannot set yourself on fire just to keep others warm, especially when they are the ones holding the matches. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away and let people face the consequences of their own actions. Ebony chose her children and her dignity over a hollow definition of family, proving that real freedom begins the moment you learn to say enough is enough. If you found strength in Ebony's victory, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice and resilience. Tell us in the comments, have you ever had to draw a hard line with family to save yourself?